All right, well, good morning. Thanks for coming along today. I'm Evan Crawford, and I work in the commercial optimization team at Amazon Web Services. Amazon pays me to go and visit our largest customers and help them reduce the amount of money which they spend on AWS. Pretty fun job. So we're all already enjoying only paying for what we use in the cloud, and everyone loves that. We don't have to pay any more for a bunch of stuff that we never used. But only some of our customers are using the cloud well enough to only pay for what they need. And I reckon there's quite a lot of people in this room who, if they were honest with themselves, are probably using a bit more of the platform than they really need. So what I'm going to talk about today is some tips that I've learned from our largest, most innovative customers about what they do to make sure they only pay for what they need when they use the AWS platform. You can save heaps of money with the tips that I'm going to share with you today. Let's look at a couple of examples, just so we can quantify the kinds of money I'm talking about. We've got a financial services enterprise that's grown quite a lot on the platform in the last 18 months or so. Now, in 12 months, they increased their CPU usage 9-fold. Their spend only went up 4 times. That's saving them $260K a month. There's only 2 levers that they pulled to save all that money. And I'm going to talk to you about what those levers are. We've got a technology company who in the last 3 months had a big spike in demand. They doubled the CPU that they needed in their web servers to handle all the increased traffic. So you would think they're probably going to double their bill, yeah? Actually, they reduced their bill for those web servers by 33%, saving them $72K a month. Again, there's only 2 levers that they pulled to get those savings. So what are they? There's a whole bunch of ways that you can save money on AWS. We just announced a new one, Spot Blocks, yesterday, and there's heaps of ways you can use the technology to save money. But when I work with our largest accounts, there's consistently 3 heavy-hitting levers that they all pull to save money at scale. These 3 levers work across almost all of our products, and if you're comfortable that you've got these 3 levers working the way they need to be, you're going to be really confident next time the CFO asks you about the cloud bill. In fact, he probably won't be able to shut you up because you'll be going on about how much money you're saving every month. So the first lever that I want to talk to you about today is leveraging the elasticity of the platform. Elasticity is one of the things that everyone loves about the cloud. Basically, if you don't need something, turn it off when you don't need it, and you won't pay for it anymore. And the easiest way to leverage the elasticity of a platform for a large account is just to turn off your non-production when you're not using it. It's really quite simple to do. I'm going to share with you some tips on how large accounts are doing that. But if you're running your development, say, in a single time zone, it should be really easy for you to turn off your non-production workloads outside of business hours and save about 50 to 60%. Once you've got your non-production being turned off, if you can get some auto-scaling happening in your production workloads, you're going to be saving even more money. Now, the next lever that can make a really big difference across a lot of our products is right-sizing. We offer a really broad range of instances, storage types, and all kinds of products. And by making sure that you select the cheapest available instance or storage type that meets your performance needs, you can save a lot of money. We've got over 60 instance types, and so there's a lot of choice there. And it's important that you're having a look at the resources that you're using and making sure that if there's a cheap one available, you're using it. And I'll give you some tips on how you can do that at scale. The third lever is using reserve capacity. And there's 2 components to this, really. Firstly, you need to make sure that you buy reserve capacity to cover your always-on resources. So this is reasonably simple. If you know that you're going to need a resource for at least a year or 3 years, and if you can share that with Amazon, we can actually factor that into our capacity planning, lower our own costs, and we're happy to share the savings with you. So if you can do that and reserve 70% of your always-on resources, you'll be saving heaps of money. And I'll go into some tips and tools you can use to make that quite easy to do, even for the largest accounts. Once you've purchased those RIs though, you've got to make sure that you get the most out of those assets. We give you some flexibility in your reservations. You can do things like move a reserved instance between an availability zone. Some RIs can be moved between instance types in an instance family. You've got to make sure that after you buy those reserved instances or reserved nodes, that you're moving them around so that you're reserving the capacity where your usage is. You should be targeting about 95% utilization of your reserved capacity. So I'll just jump back now to those two examples and drill into a bit more detail on how those two companies saved all that money. But before I do that, I'm just going to introduce one slightly technical concept, which is the elastic compute unit. The elastic compute unit is a consistent measure of CPU processing power, and it's really handy for letting us compare the cost optimization that we're achieving over a period of time, because it's a consistent measure we can look at for instances that might be a number of years old compared to today's instances. So going back to our financial services enterprise, as I mentioned before, they had a dramatic increase in usage and a much less dramatic increase in cost, saving them a bunch of money. How did they do that? Well, it was all about driving down the unit cost that it cost them to access their peak elastic compute requirements every day. So back in April 2014, it was costing this financial services enterprise 5 cents an hour to get its elastic compute units at peak. A year later, they had driven that unit cost down to 2 cents an hour. That's a 60% reduction in unit costs that they've achieved. Let's have a look at how they were using the platform in April last year. We can see that they had about 1,000 to 1,100 ECUs deployed at any given time. There's not much elasticity here. There's no reserved instances being used. Fast forward to this year, and we're looking much healthier. We can see there's been a lot of growth, but we've also got about 70% of the always-on workloads covered by reserved instances. I recommend you aim for about 70% because that gives you a bit of flexibility. If your application needs change, or if something happens that you weren't expecting, leaving yourself a bit of slack just makes it a lot easier to manage that reserved capacity. We can also see that they're scaling up and down about 4,000 ECUs every day to meet their non-production requirements. So this is how it played out in terms of the unit cost. Back in April, they started turning off their non-production workloads every day, and that drove down their unit costs by 40%, down to 3 cents an hour. Then they started moving a bunch of legacy apps into the AWS platform, which couldn't really be scaled and couldn't really be turned off. So those legacy production apps were very suitable for reserved instances. The customer brought in some RIs and drove their unit cost down another 30% to 2 cents. And then even as they experienced a large growth in capacity, and then even turned some capacity back off, they managed to hold that unit cost at that low point of 2 cents an hour. Giving yourself a bit of flexibility with your RIs allows you to maintain a low unit cost, even if your requirements change. I'll just drill into the technology company now. So as I talked about, there were some big increases in demand on those web servers and actually a drop in their costs for their monthly bill. So how did they do it? Well, they were paying 7 cents an hour for their elastic compute units just 3 months ago, and they've dropped that by 70%, just using 2 levers. The first thing they did was they converted their web servers from previous generation M1 instances to current generation C4 instances. They got a big saving from doing that. So as technology advances, we factor the latest technology into our new instance types and use that to increase the performance that you get and lower the unit cost. And you can see the C4 actually has a much lower unit cost than the M1 per ECU. So they've made that change and driven their unit cost down there. And then they've also brought some reserved instances in to cover their baseline load. So when we look back at the unit cost, they've dropped it by about 60% just by doing that right sizing and using the cheapest available instance. And then they've dropped it by about another 30% by bringing in the reserved instances. Now, they've had a large spike in demand, which has been sustained, and by not keeping track with that with RIs, the unit cost has gone up a little bit, but that company will be able to assess whether that's a new baseline, and if it is, they can bring in more RIs and get back down to 1 cent an hour. So there's some good examples about showing that there's a lot of money you can save by doing some relatively simple things. But everyone in this room knows that it's really easy to talk about turning off a server or even 10 servers. I could log into the console now and turn off 10 servers. It'd probably take me 2 or 3 minutes. Turning off 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 servers every day is quite a different matter. We're going to need to approach the problem differently. And it's the same for all of those levers. Right-sizing hundreds of instances, managing reserved capacity for thousands of instances or thousands of nodes. You need to approach things differently. As with anything in the cloud, the key to successfully managing cost optimization at scale is using a bit of automation. And I'm going to ask you to invest in a couple of different types of tools to help you out with this automation. The first one is some tools to help you understand the cost optimization opportunities that exist in your usage. And this is pretty simple, really. If you don't know that you can save some money, you're not going to go and get those savings. So we need to get some tools set up. Tagging is a great way to help you understand what you're using, who's using it, and why it's being used. Unfortunately, developers can see tagging as a bit of overhead, and if you ask them to apply too many tags, I find that they just don't do it. So what we want to do is we want to use some tools to automatically tag as much as we can and leave the developers, hopefully, to apply no more than 3 tags themselves. Any more than that, and I find they start to struggle. Next, we want to get some tools in to help us identify those resources which we can take action to save money on them straight away. So we just want to get some automated reports set up which tell us about our non-production instances that are not being turned off and about our instances that are running at the wrong size. I had a customer show me that they were turning off about 1,000 instances a day in their non-production, which was pretty good, and leaving about 500 on. They brought in daily reporting, saying what instances had been left on overnight in their non-production. They went down to 50 instances being left on every day within 2 weeks. That saved them $50K a month, just by setting up a report that let people know that they'd left a non-production instance on overnight so that they could turn it off the next night. Setting up an automated report to tell you what instances to downsize is really important, because when you've got 60 instances to choose from, you don't want to be sitting down spending hours figuring out for your thousands of instances, for each of them, what instance they should be running. We want a tool to just do all that thinking for us and just tell us this server, currently a C3.8 extra large, should be an R3.2 extra large. And then you can focus on going and actioning that change. We're going to need a tool when we're operating at scale to tell us what RIs to buy. When you have thousands of instances running in hundreds of linked accounts, and you've got hundreds of nodes running over here, a lot of DynamoDB running over there, just figuring out everything that's running across all your teams across the globe can take ages. We just want a tool that cuts through all that for us. And I'm going to share with you the best tools to do that. And lastly, and this is really important, we want to make sure that when we're saving all this money, we're making visible to everyone the outcomes of all of our efforts. We want to make sure that people know how much money we're saving, so that our teams know why we're investing effort in cost optimization. If it's just work and people don't understand why they're doing it, people are going to stop cost optimizing and it'll just become a one-time thing. We want to set up some reports and some dashboards so that people can share in the wins and understand about all the money that they're saving. After we've got the automation set up to help us identify the opportunities, we'll want to set up some automation to help us go and action those recommendations and actually achieve the savings. The first one, and this seems simple, but it's actually really powerful, is just making sure you're automatically allocating the costs of usage to the teams who are responsible for the usage. If teams think that all of their cloud expense just goes into IT's budget and it's all in a big cost center, there's very little incentive for anyone to do anything. It's just all going over there, and really I don't care about IT's cost center. But if it's going to my cost center, then either I'm going to care about it or my manager's going to care about it. And I'm going to take action to optimize my costs. So automatically allocating the costs back to the teams who are responsible for them is really important. And I'm going to share with you some tools that will help you do that. Another one is a tool to just turn off those non-production instances every day. As I mentioned before, turning off thousands of instances every day is really simple with the right scripts. Doing it manually is so much effort that I can guarantee it won't happen. You need to have a tool which just does this for your developers. Another tip that I see working really well is if you can break out your non-production workloads into their own linked account, that's going to give you a lot more confidence to turn on tools which go around turning things off automatically. So if you don't have an account structure like that, consider setting one up. Being able to quickly change instance sizes is really important, particularly in enabling you to right size. If you get a recommendation to change 100 instances to 100 different sizes, and you try and do all that manually by shutting instances down, restarting them, it's going to be too much effort and it's not going to happen. You need to be using cloud-native provisioning tools. And we'll touch on what some of the best ones are. Lastly, I talked before about the importance of treating your reserve capacity as an asset and trying to maintain a high rate of utilization on that asset. We want to get a tool in to do as much of the moving around and maintenance on those assets as we can. The less we have to do with them, the better. So let's go into some tips on how to set up these automated tools and what I've seen working really well in our large, innovative customers around the globe. Firstly, for dashboards, we see Tableau working really well, and I've got some high hopes for Amazon QuickSight as well. What does a good dashboard look like? Well, we've got a template I'm going to give you a link to in a moment, which can set up a dashboard like this. I like a dashboard like this because you've got your core metrics front and center there. This customer can see exactly how elastic they're being. They can see what their RI coverage rate is, and they can see how well utilized their existing assets are with reserve capacity. At a glance, they can see the amount of capacity they've got deployed today. And so if you have a runaway script that's deployed far too many instances, or if something's just happened that you didn't expect and you get a large spike in capacity, you're just going to see that on that graph straight away, and you'll be able to take action. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, everyone can see how much money we're saving with our RIs. For this customer, they're saving 10K a week. So everyone can look at that, and everyone's pretty happy with that, and they know why the reserved instances have been purchased, and we'll be sure to buy those reserved instances again next year. Whereas if we had have just bought those reserved instances and not kept track of how much money we'd saved, it might be a hard conversation with the finance department next year when it comes time to renew them. We can also see up in the top left-hand corner how much money is being left on the table for that extra flexibility we're keeping in our always-on workloads. So we can see that to retain that flexibility is costing us about $7K a week. And then we can make an informed decision about, do we want to go a bit higher with the reserved instances, or are we happy paying $7K a week to have that flexibility? That's going to keep you honest as your usage continues to grow. And if that number gets too big, it'll make sure that you take action to remove those savings off the table and bank them. And last, but perhaps most importantly, you can see our top 5 accounts there. And you can see exactly how those top 5 accounts are going in terms of our key metrics. I don't know about where you work, but where I work, we can be a little bit competitive sometimes. And if you have 5 teams and you put them up on a dashboard, and 2 of them are clearly doing worse than the other 3, that's not going to be the same situation next month, because no one wants to be last at Amazon. And I'm sure it's the same where you work. So try and gamify it a bit. Try and get your accounts competing. And try and make sure that they're aware of how well they're using the platform. And then you can help them out to raise those rates of optimization. Now here's what a dashboard looks like if you've got lots of upside. We can see there's no RIs for this customer, a lot of things being left on all the time. But what's good about getting a dashboard like this set up is this customer now knows how much money they're leaving on the table every month by operating like this. Just from RIs, we can see they're leaving $200K on the table. That's before we even start thinking about being more elastic. This is an actual customer dashboard. A customer set this up, and within 1 month, their elasticity had increased to 13%, and they had a plan in place to get RI coverage up within 3 months. So just visualizing the opportunity and just letting your team see how they're going can be a really powerful thing. Having a good dashboard can be key. I talked before about the importance of using an automated tool to handle your reserved instances and also to generate right-sizing recommendations. When I work with large accounts, I see these 3 providers up here being the most common, and customers seem really happy with them. Cloudability, Cloud Checker, and Cloud Health all seem to be well received by our large customers. A lot of our large customers choose to build some of their own analysis as well, just to sort of run it by what they're getting out of those providers. And we've got some templates that we've built that you can do that sort of thing in Tableau. Or you might just take the scripts and write your own SQL queries and do it that way. Here's an example of why you need a tool like this. This is again a real customer report from Cloudability. And you can see this customer needs to cover all of their fleet and other 2,500 RIs. To have gone and calculated that themselves, it would have taken the customer days. If they could have done it accurately, which would have been really hard, just having a tool like Cloudability means that they can just push the button, get the report, and get on with saving money. It's the same with right-sizing. Having the right report will let you see straight away where the savings opportunities are. It'll tell you what to do, and you can focus on going and making the changes. And we've given you some templates to get started, if you prefer to do it yourself. I talked before about the importance of tagging in helping you understand what you're using, why it's being used, and who's responsible for costs. If you don't have some tools to help you out, your tagging is probably going to look something like this. There'll be some developers tagging well, and there'll be some developers who aren't tagging. So how do we fix this problem? We need some automation to get to this, and there's a few different options. I think there were a lot of people pretty happy at Andy's keynote yesterday when he talked about the fact that with AWS Config now, we're giving you some capability to govern this stuff. And you can get alerts when instances are launched outside of your tagging policy, so you can jump on it straight away. We've got a great partner that focuses just on cost optimization called Gorilla Stack. They've written a script which they've released for everyone today, which goes around and automatically tags all of your resources with the user who created them. So if they're not following the policy, you can quickly add up how much money they're spending, and you can go and take action. You can also alter that Lambda script if you like. You don't have to tag it by user. There's a whole bunch of things you can do. It just feeds off the CloudTrails data. So have a look at that script. I think you'll find it really useful. And as I talked about before, AWS Config can now help you out. It also uses Lambda, and you can use that to improve your governance around tagging. So once we've got a few tools set up to help us understand our costs and understand the cost optimization opportunity, we want to make sure that we've got the right tools in place to ensure that we can action those changes. If you're not using a cloud-native provisioning tool, you really need to be. It's key for not only cost optimization, but just for using the cloud well in general and maintaining high rates of performance, availability, and even security. When I work with our largest accounts, the most common ones that they seem to use are these ones here. There's the Amazon products, OpsWorks, and CloudFormation, but I also see Puppet, Chef, and Bamboo getting used really widely by our innovative customers. So here's some links to some tools which will help you out with moving those RIs around automatically, some templates to get you going on things like rolling your own RI recommendations, doing instance right-sizing recommendations, and doing dashboards. And also another tool from Gorilla Stack, which will help you out with turning things on and off every day if you don't have a tool to do that already. So having all these tools is going to be really helpful. And understanding the cost optimization opportunity is going to be key. But I think that there's something that we're missing. We've got a bunch of users using the cloud, and sure, we might build a few tools, but why is anyone going to use these tools? When I work with large customers, sometimes they're very old companies and they've been developing and running applications for a long time. And what some of them tell me is that historically, those who use the infrastructure and those who paid for the infrastructure were completely separate and didn't talk to each other. And they tell me that those who paid for the infrastructure didn't actually trust those who used it to make any kind of decisions about it, which is a bit strange. We're going to need to change that kind of a culture if we want cost optimization, because now it's the users that are going to leverage our cost optimization tools that we give you in AWS. So the reason that anyone is going to actually use these tools, and the reason that you're going to be able to pull these big three cost optimization levers, is because you're going to set up a lean culture. What do I mean by that? I work with a whole bunch of different accounts at AWS, all different types. When I work with our most innovative accounts who are using the platform really well, here's what it looks like. The users who are actually driving usage on the AWS platform every day, they understand the costs of their usage, and they take responsibility for them. They're not expecting someone else to come and optimize their costs. They're doing it themselves, and they're doing it every single day. They're turning things off. They're turning things down. They're upgrading things to the latest version, because that's just what you do when you've got a lean culture. You don't want to be wasting money. And so here's a few things that we've seen can really move the needle if you want to get a lean culture set up. The first thing is making sure that everyone in your company that uses the AWS platform is aware of what your key metrics are around cost optimization. And I recommend you set up metrics around those three key levers that we've just looked at. And I'll go into a bit more detail on how you can measure those in a second. But once you've got the metrics set, you need to give your team a target. Like, we want 70% of our always-on capacity covered by RIs. Put it up on a dashboard, the teams can see how they're going, and they can start competing with each other to be the most cost optimized. What I find to be really important in actually raising rates of cost optimization is having a small central team who are experts in this stuff, who can help users out who maybe aren't quite so good at using the cloud. And they can also build and maintain those tools that we've just talked about. You're going to hear from Mike from Atlassian shortly, and he's in a team like this at Atlassian, and it's been amazing the impact that they've been able to have on Atlassian's rate of cost optimization, and I can't wait for him to share his story with you. But having a team like that is really going to make sure that you've got the right tools in place, you've got the team there to help people who need a bit of help, and it's going to make a huge difference. Who's going to help the Cloud Competency Center keep up with our rapid rate of change? And who's going to make sure that they can get on site with the users who really need to get deep in some technical things that might be preventing them from cost optimizing? That's where, if you're going to operate at scale, I find having AWS Enterprise support will dramatically increase your rate of cost optimization. If nothing else happens, having a technical account manager come on site every week and bug you about your low rates of RI usage, whinge to you about the fact you're not turning things off in non-prod, and start escalating on you internally because you're wasting money, you're just going to get so sick of your TAM complaining all the time that you're going to start using the platform in a more optimized way. So having the right level of support is really important if you're going to run AWS at scale. So once we get those fundamentals in place, here's what it looks like. We've got our users, and they've spun up a bunch of resources, and we know what our levers are. And we've got a big bill because we haven't started optimizing yet. So we bring in some tools, and we set up a dashboard, which looks pretty bad because no one started cost optimizing. But no one likes to get a low score, so people start using those levers. The tools help them out, and it's quite easy. The costs start coming down. Everyone sees the score go up, and people like that. People like getting a good score. So people just do it again and again and again. And over time, the rate of optimization goes up, your costs come down, or at least your unit costs do. You might be using a lot more on the platform. And we create this great cycle. It's a virtuous cycle of cost optimization. And you've got your Cloud Competency Center at the center of it all, making sure all of this holds together. And if there's users who are maybe not taking advantage of the levers and who are holding us back, they can go and proactively help them. I talked before about the importance of getting the right metrics in place. You don't want too many. You just want a few. In my experience, here are some good ones. You might choose some slightly different ones depending on your company. I think tracking the percentage of instances turned off daily is really important. You know, I see some companies where they might do a test, maybe a DR test once a month and, double their capacity. That's fine. But if we really want to save some good money, we need to be turning off things every day, or we need to be scaling things up and down on an hourly basis. So tracking the percentage of your instances turned off every day is going to be a good metric. Another one is tracking the percentage of your instances that are the right size. We're always releasing new instance families, and we just announced another couple this morning. So even though you might have introduced the right instance a year ago, it may no longer be the right instance because we may have a better one, or your application requirements may have changed. Just having it on a dashboard is going to let you know if that's getting a bit out of control. Another good one is tracking the percentage of your always-on resources that are covered by reserve capacity and tracking the utilization of those assets. I think if you can track these 4 metrics, you're going to be well on your way to just being able to have a simple conversation with your CFO about why your cloud usage bill is actually a really good use of the company's money. It's actually important that you weight those metrics though. Because if we turn off 100 T2 instances every day, that's nice. But if we leave the 100 C38 extra larges running, we've kind of missed the point. So we need to weight these numbers. ECU is a good one to weight by. You can do it by the on-demand cost of the resources, as long as you're factoring in the size of the resources, then you're going to be well on the way to having some meaningful metrics. I've seen some companies try to set up cloud operating models, and I thought I might just share with you a few things that seem to work and a few things that you might want to watch out for if you're trying to set up a lean culture around how you use the cloud. Let your team think big. Andy talked yesterday about how important it is to let your team innovate. You want your team to be able to think about what they can do with the cloud and not worry about whether it's going to cost too much. If you've got the right processes in place, you're going to know that you're going to be using the platform efficiently and the cost is going to be taken out of the equation. People can just think big and not worry. If you're in a large enterprise who is thinking they're going to be using a lot of the AWS platform, but you're not there yet, don't wait until you're running 3,000 instances before you start cost optimizing. Even though at the moment the savings may be small, it's a lot harder to turn off 2,000 instances than it is to set up that tool today when you've only got 20 running. If you set up that tool today when you've only got 20 non-production instances, as you grow, it's just going to be part of how you use the cloud. And it's not going to be hard at all for users to just use the cloud in an elastic manner. So the earlier you can start on stuff, the better. It may seem like you've got a mountain to climb. If you've been using the cloud for a while, you've got a lot of usage, there's a lot of cost optimization that you can do. Just start small. If you haven't been using the elasticity of the platform before, don't try and turn everything off today. Start by turning off 20 instances. See how that goes, learn, and then try it again next week or even tomorrow. Don't try and do everything at once because you'll end up getting stuck in analysis paralysis. As I said before, there's a lot of ways you can save money with the AWS platform. If you try and do everything and get to the perfect solution straight away, you're going to end up doing nothing because there's just far too many things you can do to save money. Identify some things you can do right now. Just take those savings off the table and move on. Learn from what you're doing. Turn some things off, buy some RIs, and track the savings. See what works. Some things might work for you, some things might not work. Focus on those things that are working and getting you some good savings, and just get those going as quickly as you can. As I said before, it's important to learn, do things quickly, rather than try and jump and optimize everything tomorrow. In the end, nothing will happen if you try and do that. You saw those examples before of our financial services enterprise and our technology company. They didn't go from being unoptimized today to running a completely tight ship tomorrow. It happened over time. It took the financial services enterprise about 6 months. It even took our technology company about a month to get their web servers optimized. I love a concept that Nordstrom has talked about around how they use the AWS cloud, which is that they trust their users to spin up resources when they need them. They don't stop their users from accessing the cloud because they know that their users are going to have great ideas and they want them to be able to go and try out those ideas. So they give the users access to try out the cloud, but then they're constantly running reports to make sure that when the users get access to this really powerful platform, they're using it efficiently. And then if the users start wasting the company's money, they'll have those automated reports set up and they can go in and just help the users become leaner in their usage. I really don't recommend you try and go back to the old model of having a central team which does all the infrastructure and you need to fill out 10 forms before you want to get a server. That's really what we want to get away from and why our teams are using the cloud in the first place. So don't try and make them tell you up front all the reasons they need a server, what kind of server, why do you need that big server. If someone has a big idea and they want to try out a big server, let them try it out. And then you can run your reports later, and if it's the wrong server for them, you can come and downsize it. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you now Mike from Atlassian, who's going to talk to you about the journey that they've been on in their own Cloud Competency Center. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Evan. Yeah, so my name is Mike Fuller, and I've worked for Atlassian for 3.5 years as a principal systems engineer. If you haven't heard of Atlassian, we build software to enable teams to collaborate, code, service. And Evan's invited me along to talk about what my team does in Atlassian and how we solve some of the problems that we faced doing cost optimization as Atlassian builds solutions on AWS. I want to talk specifically about these 4 questions. Is how do we explain the costs? How are we allocating these charges to the right teams? How we can save money? And whose responsibility is it to do it? They seem like relatively simple questions, but to understand the challenge that they posed, first you have to understand the situation we had. 2 years ago, we had a mess of AWS accounts. It was causing problems for the company. And how we got into that situation was just a process of organic growth. The first team in Atlassian spins up the first Amazon account, and it's really simple. That team can explain what they're doing, and the costs just allocate back to that team. Over time, they might open up a few more accounts, and things are still well and good. The company knows who the account holder is, and that team can explain what they're doing across their accounts. Then other teams join in on the fun, open up their own accounts, and same again, we still know each account ties back to a single team, and the team can explain what they're doing. But then teams start to offer services, and other teams start sharing the accounts between each other. And it's at this point the team that originally opened the account wants to share the costs between them. And finance have to figure out what every individual team is doing in every one of our accounts. It doesn't take long, and it looks like this. And we have a real problem because we have no central understanding of what's going on. The teams themselves are not sure what's happening in each of their accounts, and introducing any cost-saving mechanism just seems impossible. So we come back to our questions, and you can kind of understand why there is a challenge that it's posing. So Atlassian built a new team internally, and we call it the Cloud Engineering Team. It consisted of myself and another engineer. Our task was to get all of this under control from both a billing and security aspect. Ironically, the first thing we did was start up another Amazon account. This would become our payer account. And then working with our finance team, we identified every Atlassian team that owned an Amazon account. And then worked with every one of those teams to get access to their accounts and consolidate their account to our payer account using Consolidated Billing. At this point, we start saving on volume discounts that you get from bundling your usage to one bill. And now our finance have one invoice coming in at the end of the month. The official way inside of Atlassian to get a new Amazon account is to come to speak to our team, and we'll make sure that it's set up from both a billing and security perspective. We have our finance team identify any charges coming from outside of our payer account from Atlassian, from AWS, and they will work with us to make sure that we get it consolidated and back under control. So we have the accounts themselves now under control, but we don't know what's going on inside them. And asking our teams to explain what they're doing was already the difficult task. So we knew that tags were going to be the key. We needed a tagging policy in Atlassian, and the company needed to be implementing it. So we looked around at what other corporations were doing for their tagging policy, but we also noted that resources have a 10-tag limit. We wanted to leave spare tags around for our developers to use in wonderful ways. One consideration we made was using one tag and then having a complex data type as the value, like CSV or JSON. But that would have quickly limited us to using any off-the-shelf solutions. They wouldn't know how to reach down into that complex data and filter down on your individual patterns. It would have limited us to stuff that we write ourselves. So what are the tags that we come up with in Atlassian? All of our resources should be tagged with a cost center, which is where should this individual resources charges be allocated to? A responsible owner is someone in Atlassian who knows about this resource. Who can I reach out to say, what is this thing and why is it here? Service refers to what Atlassian service does this resource support, and a general name, because I don't know about you, I can't remember I-794CB is something, but I can definitely remember the production database or host node 10. The tags that your corporation comes up with could be completely different, but just make sure that you get a balance between enough information for you to do your reporting, but not so much that it's limiting your development. So we made our tagging policy and we released it out to the company, but were our teams actually implementing it? So we built a tool internally that goes out using the AWS API and gathers up all the resources and their associated tags. It then validates every resource as whether it's meeting our tagging policy or not, and builds a report that we can use. It gives us statistics on what is tagged, what is not, and lets us know how we're going today versus yesterday and last week. When your teams tag their resources is very important. It's not enough to have your teams go bulk tag everything at the end of the month. Every hour that that resource runs without being tagged is costs that are not getting allocated correctly. The tag does not apply retrospective when it comes to billing. Automating this tagging is going to be the most effective way that you can make sure it's done properly, and done right at the time that that resource is created. Because tagging is a pain. Well, it's a pain until you get your teams to automate it. And at first, we were battling with our teams to get them to go out and automate their tagging. They just saw it as busy work, and we needed to show the teams the value of these tags. So then we moved to build the reports that we envisioned at the start, showing them the cost by Atlassian services, cost by individual owners, what resources belong to an individual service. But the real winner for us was the cost by cost center. This is the report our finance team needed to be able to get the individual costs from an account and allocate it through to the right cost center. But remember that not everything is taggable, and of course not everything is tagged properly. So what do we do in Atlassian with those costs? For every one of our accounts, we allocate a default cost center. This cost center would be the team that owns the account, and what every untagged resource that charges the account would be then charged through to that default cost center. So at this point, we're now allocating 100% of our bill through Atlassian cost centers. This had the added side effect of, instead of just one team driving everyone else to tag, teams were thinking, well, I don't want to be tagged for that. That's not my stuff. And now you had teams driving each other to get their stuff tagged. So we've got our tags, we've got our accounts consolidated together, and we can now explain our costs and allocate them through to our right teams. But how do we save money? So the reserved instance, it's one of them concepts that seems really simple on the surface. You just buy RIs and you save money. Well, it doesn't really work that well in that way. So at Atlassian, we did some basic numbers and we went out and purchased a big pile of our reserved instances. And then within a month, we realized we weren't prepared. We didn't start by getting usages, statistics on usage and utilizations. We had no method to report on whether or not we're saving money. And from that, we weren't using the reserved instances effectively. So we implemented a few solutions like Cloudability and Netflix Ice. Amazon's since added a few basic reports to the billing console that help you get going. And then using the AWS Programmatic Billing Access, we started graphing the usage and costing data ourselves. This gave us a much deeper understanding of how it all works. It doesn't matter which tool you use, but I recommend that you start looking at EC2 usage by hour. From this, you'll see two types of workload. Down here on the bottom is basically our always-on load. It's instances running in Amazon all the time. And up the top, you can see our elastic workload, which is EC2 instances running for short periods of time. So before we moved to buy any more reserved instances, we started to work on ways that we can move our elastic workload to, our always-on workload through to elastic workloads. It saves you way more money than a reserved instance. For instance, if you take an M4 large instance and run it for 4 weeks, 24/7, it costs you roughly $85. You try and save money with a reserved instance, you can get that cost down to $50 and save $35, which is not too bad. However, we run that instance only for 10 hours a day, Monday to Friday when it's needed, it will cost us $25, saving us $60. You times that by tens or hundreds of instances, you just keep adding zeros to that saving. So how did we get our elastic load? Like Evans talked about before, we automated tools. One of the tools we built internally, we call it Sleepy Time, but it basically looks across our accounts for EC2 instances tagged with a particular tag. And that tag lets us know when the instance should run and when it should be off. And if it's running outside of its running hours, it's automatically shut down and vice versa. This then allows us to have our teams have their instances on when they're in the office and off while they're asleep in bed. Another use for the same tool is don't run servers all day that just do some batch job at the end of the day. Have them spin up right before they need to start and shut down when they're done. Autoscaling has enabled vast amounts of our always-on load to be converted through to elastic workloads, running instances only when the load requires. We're now working with our reporting tools and the enterprise support team to identify instances that are underutilized, and then we work with the teams that own them to cut down the sizes, reducing our hourly costs. So we got our always-on load down and more elasticity into our accounts, and we went back to looking at the reserved instances. Ideally, you would cover every one of your always-on hours with a reserved instance, but this would quickly limit you to doing any further works for converting your always-on load to elasticity, and also limit what you can do with the reserved instances if your workloads start to change. For these reasons, we aim to cover between 70 and 80% of our always-on load with RIs, leaving room for teams to just give us the heads up that they're moving a workload. We'll adjust the RIs to a new AZ or another instance size, and little fluctuations in our workloads don't cause us to lose money. So today, our reserved instance purchases are getting around about 90 to 100% utilization, and that we're on track to save $1 million. Our elasticity calculates out to showing that we're saving around about $120,000 a month. So we're explaining our costs using the tags and using the consolidated billing account, generating reports from the information in there. From those same reports, we then allocate the costs out to the right teams. Using the volume discounts we get from consolidated billing, converting our always-on workload through to elasticity, right-sizing our instances with our teams, and then reserving some of our always-on load, we're saving money. What I haven't covered is whose responsibility is it to do it. So our central team does the consolidating the billing of consolidating the accounts, reports on the usage and billing data, and effectively manages our reserves instances. But at Atlassian, everyone is responsible. Every team needs to be responsible with service design, reducing waste and right-sizing their instances. Saving money is a collaborative effort, and through that collaboration, we're saving lots of money. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike. So, thanks, Mike. What a great story. It's just so great to hear about how much money Atlassian's saving, and there's plenty of our most innovative customers like Atlassian that are saving a heap of money using these techniques. So here's what I want you to do next when you go back to the office next week to make sure that you can save lots of money too. I want you to make sure that you invest a little bit in setting up a team like what Mike does at Atlassian, a cloud competency center. Some people to get these tools in for you, to make sure the tools are working well, and to make sure that there's a lean culture that's bred within your organization. They'll be the stewards of that culture. I'll also ask you to invest in a few tools. They're not too expensive, but the savings are really huge that you can get by using the right tools. I've talked about how important it is to get the right metrics set up to drive lean behavior. Get your metrics defined, make sure your teams know what they are, what the targets are, make sure they can see how they're going up on a dashboard, and then celebrate the success. Make sure everyone can see how much money they're saving. And if you can gamify it a bit, I think you're going to see your teams competing with each other to be the most cost optimized. There's a lot of money to save. If you're right at the beginning of this journey, you may find it well worth your investment to go and get one of our great partners who can help you move quickly from a very low rate of optimization up to best practices. We have partners who've done this kind of thing for many customers. Just have a chat to your account manager if you'd like a recommendation about who the best ones are in this area. So remember, there's heaps of money to save. You've heard Mike talk about how Atlassian's saving a bunch of money. It's really there, it's available to you. I encourage you to go back next week and get cracking on some cost optimization. Thanks very much for your time.